I was delighted to be invited, and I'm extremely happy to be sharing with you.
How do I lovingly deal with the fact that my ego is sometimes full of fear towards the new and the unknown, and would rather cling to things and refuses to grow? I want to grow, but my ego opposes to that and is angry. It is the same when I sometimes are overwhelmed with joy and happiness. I do enjoy it, but then I fear I might dissolve or that too much is being asked for of me.
Oh, okay. That's a real good question. And that'll keep us busy for the next 2 hours, but perhaps we'll leave space for something else too. So let me just give a few thoughts that I think are helpful. I know that it's true that we have a divine self. The Sanskrit word for it is jiva, which is the most clear word because that is the word that the divine part of us that has always been present is individualized spirit, will be there eternally. That's the jiva. The jiva gets in a physical body, it begins to define itself by whatever body it's living in. And Master said, ego is the jiva identified with limitation. However, having said that, I know that a lot of people divide themselves in half, which is there's my ego and then there's my divine self. And even though there's some metaphysical basis for doing that, I find that basic idea is very unhelpful. And the question that is raised here is based on the idea that one part of me is my friend and the other part of me is my enemy. And I don't find to be at war with yourself to be a very helpful attitude. So rather than thinking about how to be nice to my enemy, I think we have to accept the fact that the ego, the spiritual self, the aspirations, the delusions, the stuff I'm proud of, the stuff I wish would go away, what I enjoy, what I'm frightened of, it's all us. It's all just me. And it's not going to help any of it go away faster to be at war with it. And yes, of course, it's true. We want to put energy into that part of ourselves, which will bring us true happiness. But we're the coach of a giant soccer team is what we really are. And we have a lot of different players on that team. And if you really want the whole team to play the game well, you have to understand the psychology of each player and try to bring the best out of each one. And so the part of us that, is fearful needs to be comforted, needs to be coaxed. It's not going to help us to shame that part of ourselves or to vilify that part of ourselves. We just have to say, all right, I'll sit here with you for a little while you act out your fears. And when you've calmed down, we'll have a discussion about what might be better. And when, the happy lad is running all up and down the field and beginning to get a little off center, having the zoomies. I don't know if that word's going to translate or not, but perhaps it will. Just running up and down wildly. We say, okay, let me just calm you down a little. Let's think about what you're doing. And I think if we just start with that attitude that we're all on the same side, even the ego, it's not a separate creation. We're not possessed by the devil. it's the same spiritual self that's a little less clear about what it's trying to accomplish. And so experience also is one of the best ways that we actually get our focus more focused, is that the ego gets the ball and it runs back and forth on the field. And from that experience, we learn afterwards, did we enjoy that? And if we didn't enjoy it, then we start thinking of a strategy to remind ourselves earlier that we shouldn't behave that way. Now, the fear, if I understand the question correctly, was expressed on two sides. One of it is the ego itself creates a lot of fear. And that's sort of the job of the ego. The ego is trying to defend a lost cause. And that lost cause is it wants to exist eternally. It wants to have its spiritual aspirations fulfilled without actually being inconvenienced. And it's not going to win. And in the end, the ego will be dissolved. But that's a long way from now. And in the meantime, we need it. We need that willpower. We need those experiences. And we should be grateful to the ego, even when it's frightened, because it gives us a chance to introspect. It brings up for us the gaps in our understanding. And sometimes we imagine that we can just affirm our way out of those gaps, but we're not going to be able to. We're going to have to face into each one of them. So when the ego presents to us all the things that we're afraid of, it's information that we need. It's information, it's like, oh, look, with one part of me, I say that this is what I want, but look, when it really comes down to it, this is how I actually feel. And we're never going to make progress unless we're willing to deal with reality. This is who I am. Therefore, my appropriate next step may be quite different than I would like it to be. And the other side of the fear that you express is when too much joy comes. We're afraid of the high energy level. We're afraid of the responsibility. We're afraid of the loss of things we're attached to. But it's all the same process, you see. It's the process of actually answering the question, who am I? And then when we can really answer the question honestly, this is who I am. Therefore, if I'm, and I often use this as an image because it's so valid, if I'm 4 years old, then I can't really take on a project that a 12-year-old would do because it's never going to work for me. And when we are at war with ourselves, then we're always ping-ponging back and forth between what we wish we were and then what we're disappointed that we are, and then what we wish we were again, but not really. And whereas if we just say, this is who I am, a very interesting mix of spiritual aspiration and pure delusion. and given that I'm about, 9 on the spiritual path, or maybe 17, or maybe even 42. I mean, whatever we are, what is appropriate given who I really am? And people think they won't make as much spiritual progress by being grounded and realistic, but you will. You'll make much more. Because what you build on a solid foundation of experience and truth. And then the whole question of ego, spirit, it doesn't even enter the equation. It's that, how can I live more truly who I am in fulfillment of my divine self today? And if we do a good job today, tomorrow works better. And then all this back and forthing, it just ceases to be an issue. we're looking at it from another angle, so it ceases to be an issue. Okay?
Thank you so much. Good. Ready for the next question? Thank you, Asha. What is the most important thing we can do in these times?
Live in the light. I suppose we're talking about the uncertainty of the world around us right now is presumably what's being spoken. I'm living in the USA, and we just had that presidential election, which was a clear-cut victory for one side, but we're just, our country is in an adventure that we've never been in the history of our nation, but to speak of my lifetime, and nobody knows where it's going. And we're just one little piece of the puzzle. Nobody knows where we're going right now. And anybody who says that they know is just hoping that they're right. Because we have the perspective of our masters. And we have the perspective of changing yugas, changing these planetary ages, which is nothing any of us know anything about. I mean, meaning the people on the planet at the present time, because these are thousands of years cycles. They're not within human memory. And what little world history we have is all going backwards into the age of Kali Yuga, the material ages, descending and ascending. But we don't have any history of Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy that we're going into. And what little remnants we have was from the other side of the cycle when the age was disintegrating. Now we're rising. It's tremendously tumultuous, all the masters say, when a planet shifts from one age to the next. Because all of our upbringing, expectation, and history is based on the age that's now over. And so all the rules that we think are so, everything is separate, the material world is fixed, dogmas are essential, this is how generation should behave. It's just, none of it's true. In my lifetime, the world has turned upside down, and I'm older than some, but I'm not that old. The world has completely changed. Look at us. We're sitting here. You can see, I'm in my room, my bedroom. That's my bed behind me. Who knows where all of the rest of you are? What countries? Even as we talk, we're being translated into multiple languages. Could your grandmother have had this experience? Even could your parents have had this experience? Everything has changed. And yugas, ages of the planet, do not just quietly go off into the night. They fight and fight and fight. And also, when there's a transition between yugas, there is a lot of tumultuous energy. And a lot of things get broken and destroyed. So, unpleasant as this sounds, if you're in the astral world and you need an incarnation in which you get to be tumultuous and fight and try to destroy, you get to incarnate during one of these transitions. So it's a very, very mixed planet at this point. And if you are a child of the light and you feel a burning desire in your heart to be somewhere where bringing light will be tremendously important, you choose to incarnate when the yugas are shifting. The way Swami Kriyananda described it, he said, most of the time, society is shaped like a cigar, is how he put it. It's very fat in the middle, and it's really skinny at both ends. And most of the time, when the ages are more stable, people just hang out in the middle. And they're not particularly good, and they're not particularly bad. They just live their lives without much thought. in a transition time like this, it gets shaped like a dumbbell. It's very thin in the middle, and it's very fat at both ends. So we see a tremendous increase in negativity and also a tremendous increase in spiritual energy. Even though there was a clear victory in our presidential election, nonetheless, it was exceedingly close. There was just this huge number of people who have a worldview on one side, huge number on the other. And the marvelous thing, I'll use American politics as the picture. The message of both sides was identical. The world is going to end if we don't win. That was the only policy debate, which is catastrophe will result, apocalypse will result. If you win, that's what'll happen. If you win, that'll happen. There was no other message, because in a way it's true. Now, the good news is, because the world as we know it is going away. This is what Master said in 1950. It's going away. It's never going to be the same again. People keep wanting it to be the same. It's never going to be the same again. Kali Yuga is over. Dwapara Yuga is rising. Now, what can those of us do who incarnated not to destroy, but to build? We're building in consciousness. Because it's a rising age, we also have to build churches and temples and centers and online courses and conferences and all these sorts of things. The good news about Kali Yuga descending, which is when Jesus incarnated, and those of us who came with him, we didn't have to build anything. We got to go off into the desert and just meditate, because there was no point in building. It was all going to come to pieces anyway, which it did. But on this side, we have to participate. But we have to participate in the world that really matters, which is not the political world, except feel free if you want to be involved in the political world, that's, or the climate change world, or whatever you want to do. Go right ahead if you feel inspired. But our real work is to be beacons of light. Because the real battle is not politics or even climate change, it's consciousness. It's like, are we going to have an expansive, God-centered consciousness on this planet, or are we going to just be selfishly fighting for our own ways? Are we going to love God? Are we going to love God's creation? Or are we just going to seize for ourselves? It's greed and selfishness versus divine attunement. And Master said divine attunement will win, but it's going to be a rocky transition. So all of us, certainly I, am quite susceptible to nervousness and worry about what might happen. But that is my enemy. My enemy is just anything that disturbs my consciousness. So this has been a marvelous sadhana, not at all a pleasant sadhana, extremely unpleasant, and it could get much less pleasant. Master promised a lot of chaos, but we came on purpose. We thought it was a good idea. And the way we get strong is to be challenged. So when we're challenged, the thing we have to do is we have to go back to the light. Just be in the light. That's all that matters right now. Just be in the light. And it's a war within our own consciousness. That's the Kurukshetra battle. Am I joyfully trusting in God? Or am I allowing anything to take away that calm faith? Doesn't matter what it is. If it takes away your faith, we have to battle against it. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, next one. In your talks about the times Ananda and Swamiji were going through seriously challenging times, you have said that every day Swamiji would say to you, "Today is going to be a good day for us, despite all the evidence to the contrary and your own and other people's feeling that things weren't going badly." As Swamiji was clearly not in denial of the objective situation and wasn't engaging in wishful thinking, how would you explain his attitude? What is the right way to think positively?
It's so much fun. I used to be able to travel to another country or another place, and they hadn't heard me speak yesterday, and they didn't know all my stories already. I used to be able to have a fresh audience. Now, when I talk to someone across the world, they know what I had for breakfast yesterday because I told them. I told them that morning, and everybody was listening. I love it. We're all just one big family. What that was referring to, in general, what that question described is true. And it also related to a very specific circumstances when we were in this horrible litigation and we were in this horrible trial that went on for, 3 or 4 weeks. And Swamiji was living in the house that I live in, and there were like about 10 other people from all the Anandas. We were all together. I would fix breakfast. We would all, like 16 of us, would sit down at this breakfast table. The day in court, the judge was extremely biased against us. We had an attorney that didn't believe in our case. We had a horrible attorney on the other side. The jury was totally unreceptive. Our lawyer was doing an awful job. I mean, just the list was just enormous. And every morning, so I would sit at the head of that breakfast table. Well, I think things went pretty well yesterday. I think today we're really making progress, don't you think? I think juror number 6 was really beginning to see our side, don't you? And we would just sit there like, are you out of your mind? But by the end, and it took me longer than I'm proud to say, I realized that Swami knew exactly what was going on, but he was staying in the light. And he was also testing us. I saw later, he was trying to train us. Even when circumstances look dark, there is always light. There's always light there. A friend of mine who was very ill with what turned out to be terminal cancer, there was no question that she would live. She asked Swami, because she was a little confused, because she had a terminal diagnosis. This was her second or third return of this cancer, and there was no question. She said, how should I pray, Swami? Should I pray to be healed? You would think to be healed, but merely for the physical body to survive is not the same as healing. Healing is really a matter of consciousness, and sometimes it's just time for the physical body to die. And so to pray that it not die can be fighting against the very lesson that God is trying to bring you. So Swami just said to her, pray to be in the light. Just pray to be in the light. Because then if you're in your body or out of your body, if you're sick, if you're well, you're always in the light, because we are always in the light. Master said to a group of monks at one point, he said, I wish you could see yourselves as I see you, and you would realize that you're nothing but beautiful light. You're just beautiful light. Now, Master wasn't saying that they weren't in physical bodies. He could see their physical bodies. Clearly they had bodies, but he could see also that they were in the light. So what Swamiji was responding to was, and I think he was teasing us, but he was also modeling for us. Just because it appears to go badly doesn't mean that God isn't also acting with his positive ray. And everything is about energy. And if you have positive dynamic magnetism, you're going to affect energy. If you have dark, discouraged, oh, here's another terrible day and everything's going to go wrong for us one more time, then that will help make sure that everything does go wrong for you one more time. Now later, like, a year or two later or months later, I don't know, I was with Swamiji and I had a chance to ask him specifically. And I described to him what I just described to you. And I told him, that it took me a long time to figure out that it wasn't that you didn't know what was going on, is you were showing us, keep your energy positive, just keep focused on the fact that God is always present and is doing whatever he wants to have done. I said, well, Swami, sometimes I feel like people affirm the positive because they're afraid that something negative might happen. And so they're not actually being positive, they're actually afraid. And I said, I have rebelled against that attitude because people would say, oh, no, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. And it was really just, don't show me what's really happening because it frightens me. That's not being in the light. That's being in fear. So I said, so I'm I get a little uneasy when people contradict the obvious facts because they're not really dynamically looking at the long range picture. They're just afraid of what might happen. And Swami's answer to me was, yes, he said, it's very tricky, isn't it? And he said, yeah, it's very tricky. You have to be absolutely authentic that you really have faith and you really do feel. Now, maybe you don't express it by contradicting what appeared to us to be obvious facts, like juror number 6 was not going to believe us no matter what. That was his way of saying it. But for example, in that same conversation, Swami said, every time we have a spiritual renewal week, which was our annual convocation at Ananda village, I say there's going to be 200 people coming. And you all think I'm just a dreamer, he said. But if I didn't affirm that 200 were coming, we wouldn't even get the 35 that actually come. And it was like, oh, I see. And that was, again, I said, it's a fine line, isn't it? He said, yeah. You have to really, essentially, pay attention and know what you're doing. So those are tools you can use to sort of sort your way through it, figure it out. Okay?
Next one. When we need to make difficult decisions in life, people often say, listen to your heart. Is that the same as listening to your intuition? What does it mean and why is intuition so important? And what is a good way to develop it?
Intuition is really tricky. There was a time when I was giving classes on how to know and trust your inner guidance. That was the title that I came up with. And at that time, I was building both the work here and building in other places, developing, drawing people together. So I used topics that people were interested in and would come to. And how to know and trust your inner guidance was a very popular topic. The problem was it's really hard to teach. It's really hard to explain because almost every aspect of intuition, for example, the fact that everybody opposes you may be a sign that your intuition is false. And the fact that everybody opposes you may just be a test because your intuition is true. So you can just say almost anything if things go well and all doors are opening. You can say it's the right intuition. But if all doors are shut, it just may be a test for you to persevere because you know that you're right. So it's very hard to teach. I gave a particular class, and afterwards someone came up to me and extremely sincerely told me all that they had learned, and everything that they had learned was exactly what I was trying not to teach them. They just took what I was saying and flipped it, and what they were saying was just not true. I was talking to Swamiji on the phone later that day. I said, I'm not going to teach this class anymore. I don't care if it's popular. It's just too hard to teach it. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I told him what happened and how frustrating it was. His answer to me was, you have to try to teach people about intuition, Asha. Intuition is the most important thing. So I said, oh, phooey, is my response. That I wanted permission to quit, and permission was denied, and it was annoying. But there it is, I had to take it. So it is a very fine line. It's like everything on the spiritual path. We're used to the material world where everything is just fixed. You know, this is my cell phone, this is my computer, this is my pillow, this is my chair. Everything is exactly what it is. And you can see it with the senses. Intuition, you can't grasp it with the senses. You can't pin it down and make rules about it. You can't even claim it and then, fight to the death for it, because as soon as we become stubborn and egoically involved, we often lose it. So how we learn what is true intuition and what is not is generally by making terrible mistakes. But we have to have the courage to keep trying, because we need to be able to guide our lives from a higher level. So let's go back to this question of the heart. When people say, listen to the heart, that's actually a profound metaphysical truth, but it has to be understood on the level that it's meant. The heart chakra is the home of the feeling aspect of consciousness. Chitta is what it's called. And chitta is the fundamental definition of Satchidananda, which is a word for God. That's eternal consciousness, Satchidananda. It's ever existing, ever conscious, and here's where chitta comes in, ever new joy. It would do us no good to be eternal and ever conscious if that consciousness was not a feeling that we wanted to experience. Otherwise, I guess that would be the definition of hell. But God realization is Satchidananda. So the location of Chit, metaphysically, is in the heart chakra. And feeling, and see, this is, well, I'm speaking English. I have no idea how this translates into other languages. But in English, the word feeling is not a clear word. And so when we teach this in English, we make a distinction between emotion and feeling, which is more or less an arbitrary distinction, but it helps us to understand. Feeling is our divine nature, because Satchidananda, that's who we are. So it's not just a question of rational ideas. It's not just a question of the mind reasoning it. It's also our having a direct experience of feeling, which tells us something that mere rational thought can't tell us. So feeling is God-centered experience. Emotion is when that feeling becomes attached and defined to specific manifestations, and then we move off of pure chitta and we move over into some aspect of duality, where there's light and darkness. I feel perfect unconditional love, and I can feel that in my own nature because God is love. That's who I am. That's Prem. I can feel perfect unconditional love for my child, for my puppy, for my mother. But all of a sudden now I've taken an unconditioned state and I've attached it to some limited form. Now, of course, that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to love. It's not that it's a bad idea. But as soon as it's become conditioned because I really love you, and of course, I don't particularly love you because you're icky, and emotion starts saying yes and no. And so the heart is capable of pure Satchidananda. It's also capable of I like you and I don't like you. So we do need to listen to the heart, but we need to listen to the right aspect of the heart. And the right aspect of the heart is that which brings us into oneness. And the delusive aspect of the heart is that which brings us into likes and dislikes. into pleasure and pain. Now, the best image, though, to understand how this works properly is if you think about a tree. Where I live, there's this magnificent elm tree that has been growing for many, many, many decades. And it's very widespread over the central green of our community. So you can be quite some distance from its massive trunk. And there's other trees that it blends in with, and you'll realize you're still looking at something that emanates from that central elm, the trunk of that central elm. But the life force of that tree is out of that central trunk and the roots. And then the branch reaches all the way out, really quite some distance, to some tiny little leaf right out there at the end. But that leaf does not have an independent existence. It has to stay connected to the trunk of the tree, or else it won't have any real life force. So what happens to us is we reach out with our Ananda. We reach all the way out to the art project I have, the child I love, the kitten, the garden I'm making, the house I'm building, the person I'm married to. And all of that is perfectly appropriate as long as it flows from the trunk of the tree. But if we take our sense of self and move and stand out there on the tiny limb and cling to the leaf, all of a sudden we're incredibly vulnerable. Branch snaps, we fall to the ground. Whereas if we're still connected to the root of the tree, the trunk of the tree, even if that branch snaps, we just come back to the trunk. So that's the heart we have to listen to. And it has a different quality than the far branch of the tree. And the way we find out is we find out. When the ego gets identified, even with true intuition, I had a very telling experience at one point. I was involved with a lot of people in a project. We needed to make a decision. To me, the decision was self-evident. I could just see what we were supposed to do. And I was right. And it came to me in what I call that way, which is something you learn after a while. This feeling in my heart is different than 90% of them that I get. This is a true intuition. But I became very egoically identified with that true intuition, and I began to fight with my friends. And I tried to overpower them with my will so that they would follow my intuition. And they understandably didn't like that. And they all started fighting back, and it just turned into a mess. So at a certain point, I wrote them all a letter, and I said, even if my intuition was true, I've polluted the waters of it by the way I've worked with it, because it had moved from feeling to pure emotion because I had become so attached to getting my way. So I withdrew from the conversation. I said, you all make a decision, tell me about it later. They all came to exactly what I had decided. And that wasn't the point, except a little bit, because it was a true intuition, but I spoiled it. So from that experience, I have learned it's not just a question of how it begins, it's how you work with it afterwards. And I the only thing I can say is make a few 100,000 mistakes, then you begin to know sort of which ones work. I was working in another context with an intuitive idea for a project, which turned out to be disastrous. And afterwards, Swamiji said to me, oh, well, Asha, whenever your ego gets involved, you make terrible mistakes. And when I thought about it, there was, I was trying to prove other people wrong. I was trying to prove myself effective. And I had a feeling about it. I definitely had a feeling about it. But it wasn't a centered feeling, because there was all this pride involved and this ego involved. And so a lot of times things feel right because they just cooperate perfectly with all my flaws, so they just run like water. So you have to ask yourself, what's really motivating? And how detached am I? How calm am I? And it's a lifelong practice. There's a very ancient talk by Swami Kriyananda about how to know and trust your inner guidance, which is just absolutely perfect. I have no idea how to find it for you, and it's in English. But some of you might be involved with Treasures Along the Path. Treasures Along the Path, it comes from Ananda village of old talks of Swami. I'm quite sure that it's in the archive somewhere. And I've based everything that I've worked with on that one. And there have been zillions since then. And I myself have given quite a few that I would stand behind. But here's what I want to say to finish. Yes, intuition is natural. And yes, intuition comes right out of the heart. But you have to learn it. It's like everything else. You have to learn it. Just because it's inherent in you doesn't mean you already know how to do it. I'm not a particularly good singer, but even people who are gifted from childhood with beautiful voices, they learn to sing better. And so to imagine just because I can have intuition that I do have intuition is presumptuous. Like everything else, we have to work on it. We have to train ourselves into it. We have to pay attention. Yes, one last point. The mind and the heart work together. Just because, sometimes people think to listen to the heart means that everything the mind has to say should be ignored. That's very, very dangerous. Reason is very important and common sense is very important. And grounding our intuitions in realistic action is also very important. Sometimes people say, well, I have a feeling I'm supposed to do this. I say, well, okay. So what are you doing to get yourself ready, to make yourself capable? Nothing. I just have a feeling I'm supposed to do it. Well, you might have a true intuition, but it won't be realized unless you put balanced energy behind it. So all of those are just some ideas that could help. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Next one. In these difficult times, I worry a lot about my work, about my relatives, about the country, about my health, about my finances, and it makes me so sad. I feel like I'm on a downward spiral. How do I stop this, and how do I stop myself from worrying too much, and how can I bring joy back into my life? And will that have an effect on other people, on others too?
Wow, that's pretty much the story of all of us right now, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, well, let's add the dying species and the planet. She forgot to worry about the planet. We should also worry about the planet. I mean, we can just add what's been happening to me. I've been in, the U.S. has not handled this pandemic particularly effectively. And right now, the state of California, the county that I live in, the country I live in, is in the worst condition it's been since this started. Unbelievably so. So things had opened up a little, things are shutting down again. God knows, and God only knows what's going to happen here in terms of the whole list that is just presented there. Every one of those issues is right here in my life, right here. And I've been more or less in a very restricted way of life since last March. As it happens, I can still do everything that's important to me to do. So it's not so hard for me. But what that has made is it's made my life very stark. Because I used to be able to just, I feel a little restless. I'll get in my car, I'll go out to breakfast, I'll call a friend, we'll go to a movie, just lots of things that were safety valves. I don't have them. And by the grace of God, it's not a real serious issue, but it's sufficient that I am in a daily, I have a daily experience of my level of consciousness with almost nothing to distract me from that. Again, fortunately, I've been at this for a while. So it's not like I'm so shocked. But it's really vivid, much more vivid than it would have been under normal circumstances. So it is so clear to me that there is only ever one thing going on, which is, am I worried? Am I joyful? Do I have faith in God? And it's quite natural to be anxious over the unknown. It's quite normal to be anxious over the possibility of suffering for oneself and for others. It's quite normal to be anxious over, am I going to lose my home? Am I going to lose my job? And the problem is, all of these fears are justified. So this is not a time when you can say, oh, I'm just worrying for no reason. There's a whole lot of reasons to worry. And when I was speaking earlier about the transition from Kali to Dwapara, and Master's predictions about international violence and economic depression, I don't need to enumerate all of it, because anybody just has to look out the window these days and you can see it happening. You don't need a God-realized master to tell you. Now, I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying that to realize, we have a real issue here. We have a real issue now that can't be just wished away. Now, here's the thing about this. This is great news, because the ego wants a life of ease and pleasure. It just does. That's the part of us that wants that. It's a big part of us. And this planet is sort of designed for ease and pleasure. That's the age that we're in right now. Ego gratification is where we are. We're putting Dwapara energy into a Kali Yuga idea, which is, I'm here to please my ego, which is ease and pleasure. And we're refined people. We're not really looking for something awful, but we want to be comforted. Of course we do. The problem is, our superconscious self wants freedom. And it knows that ease and pleasure is just a temporary port in the storm. And it's really not going to fulfill us. And this is where the first question was, the ego and the soul, we're in it together. And right now, the ego is not getting a lot of what it wants, or at least its desires are seriously threatened, and the threat is real. So the question is, are we going to cling to the sinking ship? Or are we going to find the courage to put more of ourselves into the raft of spirituality? And I'm in the same sinking ship that everyone else is in, and I'm getting up every morning asking myself the question, how am I going to get through this day? And I don't find it easy. I find the variations in my consciousness and the inclination toward worry, which I'm a bit of a high-strung person anyway, so that's my default. I go there, and that road is a well-paved road for me. But it's the only battle worth fighting. And part of getting yourself out of that tailspin is to stop expecting that we're just going to be rescued. I keep thinking, things will go back to the way they were. The pandemic will stop and Silicon Valley will thrive again, and we'll all would that be good? For ease and pleasure, that would be great. For spiritual freedom, that I can just sort of hunker back down into my cocoon of everything's going to be okay. I don't have to put out any energy anymore. Would that really be good? See how complicated it gets? But I do understand why a person is sinking. And no, you're not going to be able to help anyone if you sink. You're not going to be able to help yourself. You're not going to be able to help anyone. The only way we can help each other, and you see, the whole point of what's happening Master was very emphatic about it. People have lost touch with higher realities. I mean, as a culture, as a planet. And the reason difficult times are coming is to teach us to cling more to God and to depend less on the world. So that is the whole point. It's not really about whether your relatives are going to suffer or your health is going to break or you're going to lose your job. The whole point of the whole thing is, will you, in times of difficulty, where do you turn for comfort? And we need to just keep turning to God. Now, the most important thing is to turn to God. And the way I turn to God sometimes is, just huddled up in the fetal position with the blanket over my head, and inviting him in, It's like, would you huddle in here with me for a while? It's not like you're marching forward, absolutely fearlessly with the banner of sadhana held up. No, not true. And somebody asked me the question, what does it mean to surrender something to God, to give it to God? And I had to try to really think about that, because there's a whole lot I can say, but I had to think, what is it when I really just have to give it to God? And my voice gets really small, and my whole self feels really small, and I sort of pull whoever I'm talking to. I usually talk to Swamiji. People talk to Master. People talk to God, a guardian angel, Christ, whoever you want to. Sometimes I talk to Mother Mary, and the words sound like this: we have a problem. What are we going to do about it? And that's a real, authentic prayer. And that's the most important thing. Yeah, it's really scary. So where do we turn when we're scared? And God's not going to take the fear away necessarily. We may have a lot of tough things to face. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable. I'm well fed. I still have friends. I can do good work. I mean, this is an inconvenience I'm living with. There are real problems. This is not a real problem. This is a mere inconvenience. We could have real problems. And when we do, or if we do, where will we turn for comfort? That's what we have to train ourselves. Where will we turn for guidance and comfort? And my experience has been that one person who is not terrified can shift an entire room, can shift an entire community. And yes, if you want to help other people, turn to God, turn to God, turn to God. Even with whatever you can bring to the table, but bring your honest self to the table, your true and honest self, because God's not fooled anyway. And if you're sinking, and fortunately I haven't sunk for more than a relatively short period of time, but I've had some pretty bad days and weeks in this cycle. It's just like I know there's still no answer but God. And if I'm too frightened to really feel that comfort, I'm not mistaken about where that comfort is going to come. It's going to have to come from there, because dramatically there may be no other safe haven. And even if there were, what we want is freedom, not just another couple of months, a couple of years, a couple of incarnations of ease and pleasure. Because in the end, it's still going to be the same issue. And we really have to stick together. How do we pull ourselves up? Well, surround yourself with positive influences. God bless the internet. You can be in spiritual company all the time now. I think Swamiji's music is particularly helpful. Chanting, singing, any kind of music that's really uplifting, not music that stirs the emotions, but music that calms the heart, is very helpful because it goes directly in. To get over the language barriers, Swamiji has 2 recordings. One is of him chanting Om, and the other is him chanting a couple of Sanskrit mantras. Just just the sound of those in the room can really change the whole vibration. Have spiritual amulets. For a very difficult period of time, I slept with my Kriya Mala in my hand. I held it in my hand. When I would go to bed, I would take spiritual things to bed with me, because the subconscious mind gets a hold of you. So pay attention to bedtime, going to sleep and waking up, because the subconscious mind is particularly active then. Develop falling asleep rituals and waking up rituals that grab the subconscious mind right away and make it face positive. Make sure that when you open your eyes in the morning, you see something spiritually uplifting. Maybe have right available to you that you can turn on some spiritually uplifting. I just listen to Swami Kriyananda's voice a lot. I just let him talk to me. And his concepts help me, but the sound of his voice helps me. Go to sleep to the sound of that. Wake up to the sound of it. I mean, these are just what work for me, but the principle is what I'm trying to say. Every time you begin to sink, consider it a life-threatening emergency and respond accordingly, because it is. I mean, there's a very, mundane things like physical exercise. If you can get strong rhythmic breathing going through aerobic exercise, that will immediately calm you down, because you can't weep and breathe strong and rhythmically at the same time. I've tried, and you can't do it. You may stop breathing deep and rhythmically so that you can cry, but you can't do them at the same time. Anyway, all of those things are helpful. Okay.
Next one. People can be very judgmental about spirituality. They say it's for people who are not with both feet on this earth, or hippies. It makes me a bit afraid to speak openly about my desire to live a spiritual life. Can you explain to me, so I can explain to them, what a spiritual life according to Yogananda is or means, and what it has brought you, and how you have dealt with this, if you had to deal with it?
Very good question. All the questions are good. Okay, that one is interesting. Now let me think for a minute. First of all, I'm going to quote Jesus, and I don't know who wrote the letter, and I don't know who they're trying to explain it to. But Jesus says, don't cast your pearls before swine. And I don't know if the people who are challenging the person who asked that is actually dealing with swine. But what that means is, don't try to persuade people of something they're not interested in knowing. So the first thing is, if people say things to you that are contrary to what you believe, if they're genuinely interested in your point of view, or genuinely interested in you and really want to know what you really think, then you can try to explain it to them. If they just want to put you down and prove that you're wrong, don't waste your energy. This has not happened to me personally just because I'm articulate and I'm forceful, and it hasn't been my karma. But with other people who have been, where so-called friends or relatives tried to undermine what they were saying, what I've suggested you say is, well, that's a very interesting point of view. I'll keep it in mind and watch what happens and see if what you say proves true. Just like, or Sri Yukteswar's marvelous statement was, well, perhaps you're right. We'll see. And if you're not arguing, then the whole thing goes away. And perhaps they are right. You haven't conceded anything. You've just said, well, I know you. Thank you for telling me. I'll think about it, or I'll pay attention. So far, it's not proved true, but this is what I've found. Now, that's part of it. Now, if people are really interested, many years ago, on one of the first lecture tours I took beyond the boundary of Ananda village, where I started my spiritual life, I was traveling up and down the west coast of America for about 4 or maybe 6 weeks, giving lots of programs in lots of places. And it was in the, must have been the late 70s, and I had a slideshow. Again, I'm old enough now where I say things like, do you know what slides are? And it was a slideshow of our community, and it was beautiful, beautiful photographs of a beautiful place. And I would show that to people as a way of expressing what we were doing as a community. And it was entrancing, and I could tell the story in a way that was very attractive. And almost always I would get a question like this: well, I'm sure you can live that kind of life in a community like that, but what about if you live in the real world? That's what they would say to me. And for about 4 of the 6 weeks, I would always try to answer that. I would talk about how it was practical, how it could be used to make your relationships better. You can concentrate better at work. You can set your goals. You have more willpower. And then one day, I just realized it was a ridiculous question. Because, I'm not naive. I lived in the real world before I moved to the community. In the real world, people drink, watch a lot of television. Many of them take drugs. They overeat. They're always going out to distract themselves. If anything bothers them, they'll take sleeping pills if they're awake at night. I mean, everything about the real world is set up to distract you from a deeper understanding of what you're doing. You follow a career because it's going to give you money, because you think money is going to make you happy. You don't ask any of the questions. And you just behave as you're supposed to behave. And you often don't ever really ask, who am I? What am I really called to do? At Ananda, in the Ananda life, as Swamiji, brought us Master's teachings, you don't get away with anything. You have to always be aware and authentic. I'll give you an example from one of the children. For a long time, our school in Ananda village only went up through middle school. And when the children wanted to go to high school, they had to go to a different school. So one of the children in our school went to the high school, and then the local high school in town. And then the word came back that she was on the honor roll and she was doing really well in school. And so I saw her and I congratulated her. And she laughed. She said, when I was at Ananda school, she said, they wanted to know whether I had good energy. They made sure that I was getting along with the children. They wanted to be certain I understood the concepts. I always had to be responsible for all my actions. And she just made this big list. She said, now where I go to school, if I can just give them the right answers, that's all they care about. She said, it's effortless to go to school there compared to when I was going to Ananda school. And that's about the difference. It's like it's effortless by comparison to live in the world, because people don't really hold you responsible for yourself on the deepest level. Now, I'll answer it from it. That's one side of the equation. The other side is like, how practical is this? Well, think of it this way. What is the biggest obstacle to success and happiness in life? In work, it's the inability to concentrate. It's fear of failure. It's not knowing how to get along with other people. It's laziness. In your relationships with people, it's emotional reactions. It's not being able to intuitively know what they really want from you. It's your own feelings being out of control. It's past life influences that you don't even know are there. Make a long list. In other words, what is the biggest obstacle to everything that we want in life? Oh, me. I'm the obstacle. I'm the obstacle. So if I can master myself, then everything else that I want is at least going to be easier to accomplish, even if it's not guaranteed. We had the question earlier about positive thinking, being able to focus positive magnetism rather than getting sucked down into sadness every time things don't go right. What is the most supreme system for self-mastery? It's yoga in its fullest sense, Sanatana Dharma. Understanding who I really am, where happiness really comes from, how to have energy at will, developing the ability to concentrate on and on and on. So people think that spirituality is divorced from, quote, real life. But spirituality is real life. It's just a misunderstanding of what spirituality is. What the path of self-realization is that we are infinite beings who are related, who are part of a greater reality, and all the positive potential that the human heart can imagine is our true destiny. And the spiritual path is the road to achieving it. And it has enormous everyday life, real world consequences. It's just the person I was when I came to Ananda, now admittedly it's 50 years ago. But thank God I got rid of at least a large part of her. There's too much of her left for my taste, and I'm looking forward to the annihilation of the rest of her. But as I often say, I would be dead in a ditch somewhere if it wasn't for what the spiritual path has taught me about God, yes. But understanding about God is understanding how to live. That's what Ananda is. I mean, this is master's genius, but amplified 1,000-fold by Swami Kriyananda, who took those esoteric teachings and turned it into a way of life. Marriage, money, raising children, artistic expression, personal emotions, money magnetism. You know, he wrote 150 different books. And every one of them is feet on the ground, how to live, teaching. Because there's no difference between spirituality and life. That's what Sanatana Dharma is, that which is. And that which is you and me trying to make our way in this world. What else would we do? We have to get up every morning and figure out what this day is. And spirituality gives you a point of reference. That's what it did for me. The question was personal. I had no point of reference. I had no fixed point of reference. I had lots of energy, lots of possibilities, lots of talent. I had all this stuff going on that was nice stuff. But I had no point of reference. I couldn't figure out how it all fit together. And especially when I met Swamiji, he just picked it up from the right string. Oh, this is how it works. And ever since then, I don't always apply it perfectly, but I always know where that thread is. And it's like, as I mentioned before, I'm not a very good singer, but I can sing in a choir. If somebody next to me can really sing the part well, then I can match them. If I'm all by myself, it's really a little unpredictable. But what the spiritual path is the right note. And if you're honest and conscientious, it just gives you a fixed point to which you can always refer. And even if you're distant from it, you still know where it is. And that's everything. Honestly, I don't know how people live without that. And the truth is, it's very hard for them. It's not easy for us even on the path, but by comparison, oh my gosh, my worst day is 1,000,000 times better than my best day before I got on the path. I mean, no matter how many bad days there are, and there are always bad days, they're still wonderful days. because underneath it is this truth. I am the disciple of a great master, I say. I am the disciple of a great master. And that's all that matters in the end. Okay, next question.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I've heard that meditation is beneficial for all except those that are depressed. Given that anxiety and depression are on the rise globally, please share your thoughts on how to effectively integrate spirituality techniques into the lives of those trapped in a cycle of despair.
Did you say that meditation is not good for people who are depressed? Was that what the question said?
Yeah, I repeat it. I've heard that meditation is beneficial for all, except those that are depressed.
Okay, we can stop there because I'm not sure that that's true. And I don't know which language that came out of. So I want to just clarify that. Meditation is not good for people who are mentally unbalanced. And of course, these are nuances of words, and I'm not being psychiatrically exact. Mentally unbalanced means that people can't relate to objective reality, but tend to slip into really breaks from objective reality. Meditation is not good for such people because when they separate themselves out from objective reality, they don't elevate their consciousness. They just shoot off sideways into some world of their own making. And sometimes people who live in subjective worlds think that people who meditate are kindred spirits because we're also not living in the same relationship to objective reality, but we're expanding our relationship, not exiting from it. If you're merely depressed, and forgive me, I don't want to say that too lightly. If depression is your issue, meditation can be a wonderful solution. If you're capable of wresting yourself away from those downward pulling energies. However, if the depression is so strong or the anxiety is so strong that when you cut yourself off from sensory input, you just spiral downward, then it would be unwise to meditate. So it's more a question, I would say it's a question of degree, and it's also a question of what happens when you try to meditate. So if meditation doesn't work for you because of those mental conditions, then one should concentrate on chanting, on prayer, and above all on selfless service. Above all on selfless service, to get out of yourself and to give to others. The channel is blessed by that which flows through it. So you want to get some positive, dynamic, uplifting something flowing through you. And selfless service is far and away the best way to do that. But you want to hold on to some aspects of the spiritual path, which is why we would talk about chanting or prayer or yoga postures or satsang, good company, just anything you can do to keep the vibration around you upward. Energization exercises would be very good for people with anxiety and depression, because what's happening is your point of concentration is being continually kidnapped by one of the vrittis in your chakras. And what the energization exercises do is they help give you the capacity to direct your energy, put your energy under the control of your willpower. And so when you develop through the energization exercises, which use your physical body to train the will, then you can get in the habit of choosing where your energy is going to focus. So that when the vritti in the chakra grabs you and tries to persuade you that you have to be anxious and depressed, you have some tool in your toolbox that will at least give you a fighting chance of getting out of it. So the thing about true spirituality is it can be applied in many different ways on many different levels. Self-realization is not a dogma. It's a scientific series of practices based on the way the energy flows in the body and how the way the energy flows in creation and how those energy flows affect consciousness. When Swamiji wrote his series of lessons, he called it, now it's called, the art and science of Raja Yoga. Because there's the science, which says, here are the chakras, here's the Kundalini energy, here's the Christ center, here's the breath and concentration technique. But which one you use and how you use it and at what phase of your life you use it and when you use it, that's the art. Master actually said, you have to do 1% of what he taught and you'll make great spiritual progress. 1% is a very, very small percent. For many years, I thought Master had said you have to do 10%, which made more sense to me. But he actually said 1%. But everyone will choose a different 1%, which is why he had to teach so much. But he was making the statement that not every aspect of the path applies to everyone. And the art of it, if you're an artist, you have to have some sense of what's really going to work to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. So if one finds oneself or is trying to help people whose mental state or emotional state makes certain things ineffective, then find something that works. There was a very devoted member of our church, a very sweet woman, lovely person who's been on the path forever and still is. She's a terrible meditator and she doesn't like meditation much at all. And because she doesn't have the capacity to do it. She has mental differences, learning differences is part of it. But she came to me once and she was very distressed because she's such a bad meditator. I said, but my dear, you love everything about the spiritual path. You love the music, you love the liturgy, you love the people, you love the company, you love serving. You're really a beautiful devotee. You're just a terrible meditator. So just concentrate on what you do well and just keep doing what you do well as you can. Swami said to me about me, and everything else will follow in relatively short order, is how he put it. And I said, relative to what, sir? Relative to infinity, relative to 100,000 lifetimes, relative to this year. But it didn't make any difference. Just do what you can do, what works for you, what scientifically proves itself beneficial. Leave the rest of it on the table until such time as it works for you. And the beautiful thing about, especially Ananda's expression of the path, is you have so many choices. And that's the most important thing. Okay? God Almighty, we're all in the same boat, aren't we? I guess it's always been true, but it really seems to be especially true. How many of these questions are about tension, anxiety, fear? Oh dear. And I sympathize with it. It's the way it is. There is no shortcut. I had a man in my classes for years. He's a dear and wonderful friend of mine. I won't say his name, but he's amused every time he hears this story. He lived in our community for 20 years. He came to all my classes. He was wonderful in class. He asked lots of questions. It took me about 19 of those years to figure out that he was asking me the same question every time. And the question was, Isn't there an easier way? Isn't there a shortcut? And no, actually there isn't. We have spent many incarnations developing a consciousness and an attitude toward life. We've made innumerable choices. Many of them seemed like a good idea at the time, but didn't prove to actually be the road to the happiness that we were seeking. I mean, it doesn't take much introspection to see that. You can probably look at yesterday. You can certainly look at 10 years ago. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but it really wasn't. But it's a habit, and now I have to work on it. But here's the thing. There's nothing we can do about our present state of consciousness, meaning there's nothing we can do to undo what got us to this state. We are where we are. We are the result of all the choices we've made up until now. The only thing we can do is to make the right effort now. This was Sri Yukteswar in Autobiography of a Yogi. The past lives of all men are dark with many shames. And that's us, all men, all women. We've all done things. They don't have to be despicable, but they were not the brightest, from our real need now. Everything in future will improve if we make a spiritual effort now. Most people do not persevere because we haven't suffered enough. So when I am tense and worried and have all those things that everybody has, I say to myself, there's only one way out of this. And it is to just continue to put one foot in front of the other. Because the only way that I can guarantee that nothing good will ever happen is to stop trying to make something good happen. And all the masters promise us that if we persevere, everything will change. And even a little experience on the spiritual path, you realize it works. It's just an energy relationship. We've built up a lot of magnetism in our chakras for a certain state of consciousness. And the mere fact that we realize now that that was an unfortunate thing to have done and we'd like to reverse it, doesn't mean that it's going to be reversed the first time it occurs to us. If you take your credit card out and run up $50,000 worth of debt and you only make $10,000 a year, you've got a big debt to pay. And even when you realize that was a bad idea, you're still going to have to do the work to pay it off. Well, that's what karmic debts are. We just took pleasure and ease over and over again when it wasn't really a good thing to have done. And now we have to put out enough energy to reverse what we did incorrectly. Now, the really, really good news is Kriya Yoga makes it work faster. Being a disciple or being in devoted relationship to a great master, loving God, they can help. That is the shortcut. But it's not instantaneous either. But success is guaranteed. And what choice do we have? See, I work it from the other side. This is a terrible state of consciousness that I'm in right now. What is the way out of it? And it doesn't really matter how long a walk it is from here to home. If I'm going to have to walk it, I'm going to have to walk it. And I can just sit on the trail and weep and throw tantrums and sob and rail against God and refuse to get up. And I can do everything. And then sooner or later, I'm going to have to stand up and start walking. It's just as simple as that. I remember once, this only happened to me once, I used to be much more weepy and upset about everything. I mean, I have many examples of how spiritual path has changed me. I remember one day I was going to have one of those female fits. Forgive me, women, but there is such a thing, and we all know it, one of those female fits. And I sort of crawled into my room and lay down on my bed, and I was about to have a female fit. And I thought, oh, you're going to do this. It's going to be exhausting. In another half an hour, you're going to get up. Your whole day is going to be ruined. You're going to look terrible all day because your eyes are going to be all puffy and nothing will have changed. And I just said, I think I just won't. And I just got up and I just went on with my day. I just skipped the whole thing. I'm not always able to do that by a long shot. But some part of me always knows that. I remember once I had to finally realize I was just furious. I was so angry inside. And I finally realized I was mad at the gurus. I was mad at all of them because they put something really hard in front of me. And I was mad at them because I knew that eventually I would face it and overcome it. And it was going to be so darn much work. I was just so mad at them. I was mad at them because they knew I would do it. And I just didn't want them to. You can see how goofy it all was. And it wasn't funny at the time. Believe me, it was not funny, but it was funny pretty soon after. But that is it. And the battle is less, how do I get out of this anxiety, even though you think that's the real battle. The battle is to use every negative state of mind that we ever get into as a profound incentive to stick with the spiritual path. And the battle is not that you're still angry or upset or anxious. The battle is that it crosses your mind to quit. That's what you have to fight against. Okay, I think that's the best we can do with that. That's a long one, but the questions are real. The spiritual path requires tremendous humility. And it's a really tricky business. Who is it that pulls me down? You. This is who you are. You are, and I think we answered this earlier, but this is you. You have to really think about this. I am this bad. I am this lousy as a devotee. I am this. This is who I actually am. I'm a person who can become anxious and afraid and second guess myself. Now, we don't want to say that in such a way as, oh, this is who I am. I'm so terrible. It's not like that. It's just like, this is my actual state of consciousness. Look at this. I was so mad one time. This was fortunately not that recently, but I was so mad once. I actually understood why people kill each other. It's like, as a rule, I wouldn't want to kill someone, but I understood why. If I could just get rid of this person, then everything would be better. Someone came to me once complaining about someone who is very difficult. What can I say? They're a difficult person. They wanted me to do something about that person. So I said, we have this big green area in the middle of our community. I said, let's take the person out into the middle of the green. Let's invite everyone to make a circle around, and then let's shoot them. Let's just get rid of them. Won't that be a solution? I mean, it's sort of like, this is who we are, friends. You know, this person who's difficult is a sincere devotee. You who get so upset because people won't do what you want, you're a sincere devotee. But this is what we're all like. It is me. I thought this attitude would be helpful to me. And I apparently still think this attitude would be helpful to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. Because think about this. There are things that we won't do, that we never even consider. Like one time in my life, I considered murder. And once, as a provocateur, I proposed execution. But sincerely, I've never raised my hand to anyone in anger. And I would certainly never kill anyone. It never crosses my mind. But will I torture myself with my own self-doubt? Oh, yes. Many times before breakfast, and then, always at 11, and then again at 1. I mean, I still do it because some part of me still thinks it's a good idea. Now, there's another part of me that has transcended this idea, but not all of us, not every part of me. And we just have to be able to sit there very calmly and say, this is who I am. I had this experience once. I happened to be with Swami when it happened. There was a person with whom I did not get along in our community at that time. I'd had a very difficult karmic relationship with the person, but circumstances had shifted, and I really felt that I had a complete change of heart, that I'd seen the beauty of the soul, and it was fine. So there was an opportunity to spend a lot of time with that person, and I just innocently and enthusiastically stepped right back into proximity. And it was about 30 minutes before I was just ready to not really kill them, but ready to kill them again. Everything that had bothered me was completely back, 100%. I was talking to Swami. I was weeping. I was so upset. I thought I had overcome this. I really thought I was over it, and I haven't at all. Swami's response was so casual. Well, he said, you thought you were free, so you weren't putting out any energy to overcome it. Now you know, and you can work on it. And it was like, it said you weren't free. You just thought you were. So why is it such an awful thing to find out that you aren't free? So here's what I'm trying to say. We have lots of karmas that we haven't yet worked out. Unless you're an avatar, you have lots of karma. Period. That's the beginning, that's the middle, that's the end of the story. The karma will express itself in whatever way is appropriate. My external life is extremely uninteresting. My internal life is a 3-ring circus. My karma is all inside my head, which is a really hard place for it to be, but that's where it is. For a lot of us, all our karma's inside our head, but it's just our karma. So that's who we are, and it's humiliating. That's the only word I can think of. The mere fact that sometimes it's private doesn't make it any less humiliating. But why is it humiliating? Just to realize that I'm not an avatar. Why are we humiliated when we realize, I have a lot of work to do? So we need to make a division between the faults that we have and the complexes we develop about the faults that we have. The fault is a real problem. Don't make it worse. Just say, every night I wake up with self-destructive thoughts, and it interrupts my sleep, and it's super unpleasant. I need a strategy. Whether it's a natural sleep substance that will help you go to sleep, or an occasional heavy drug that'll get you out of it, whether it's getting up in the night, turning on the music, music, opening a window, going to sleep with your mala in your hand. But you need a strategy because this is what you are. And there's nothing wrong with it. Now you've decided to turn toward God. And friends, this is the process. I mean, Swami's response to me, there wasn't a shred of, oh my God, you're kidding. You're still like that after all this time, you stupid moron. Not even, there was like zero judgment. It was just like saying, turn right up there because the market we want is over on that street. I mean, that's about how much like energy he gave it. Oh yeah, you thought you were free, you weren't. Good news, now you get to work on it. Now, just on the other side of it, just by the way, if you can really understand the chakras in a practical sense, I mean, they're esoteric, and there's an esoteric dimension to it, but it's the real practical how the chakras influence everyday life. It's enormously helpful for really understanding why our consciousness is constantly being kidnapped. It's vrittis in the chakras that are lying in wait for that moment when the upward stream going to the spiritual eyes, just a little weak in the middle of the night is a great time for that. And the whirlpool of the vritti is just hunkered over there in the corner, and it sees your consciousness goes by and it throws a black bag over it and sucks it into itself. And this is life. This just is life. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with you. It's just the vrittis playing themselves out. For those of you who can understand English, I have a couple of courses online on my YouTube channel. I say this partly, I gave this 4-part chakra series. It has thousands and thousands of views now. It's way, way bigger than anything I've done because I think it's really, really, really useful. So whether or not you can follow what I've done, but try to really understand how the chakras work in everyday life. Because then when you're lying in bed and you're woken up by one of your vrittis breaking rank and grabbing your consciousness, you don't have to freak out. You just say, trapped in the whirlpool, hang out here for a while, then I'll get out. And eventually, the river of my consciousness flowing toward God will be stronger than all these vrittis, and then it'll be done. It's the same thing. We have to use every time our consciousness goes where we don't want it, let that be an ever stronger incentive to persevere until we have self-mastery. Okay?
I think one last question, Asha. What do you think about the fact that this worldwide fear of a virus, which no one has directly proven, is not rather the fear of the consequences of these non-essential cursive measures by almost all governments, up to the threatened compulsory tests and vaccinations, but which affects practically everyone and which in reality has completely different, very evil backgrounds?
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's go to big conspiracy theories. That is always fun. Swamiji was very open-minded to many explanations. He was by no means small in his possibility. He was by no means narrow in his sense of things. He had a very impersonal view. Some people who are proposing alternate theories of many different things are trying to use Swami or Master to support what they're saying. Everybody these days has a point of view. I don't think, I'm just going to say this, some of the really, really big conspiracies require an enormous number of really competent people working together. I haven't actually seen that much of it in early Dwapara on planet Earth, but that doesn't mean that there aren't nefarious forces working for greedy self-interest in every area of life. That's why I went to an ashram at a really young age and have participated very little in society, the mainstream of society. That's why at the age of 16, I told my father I was never going to join his work. I wasn't going to, because it seemed to me that it was too much of a mixed bag, because this is early Dwapara. In early Dwapara, shadow and light there's a lot of shadow over the light, and a lot of souls who have selfish karma have power. So I think the possibility of a lot of souls with selfish karma manipulating many things is a perfectly reasonable explanation, as reasonable as any other. The question is, what is the appropriate response from the point of view of a devotee to any of these revelations? Now, I want it to be said, I'm really not a great devotee of nothing that we're being told is true. Everything is really different than it is. I'm not really in that camp. I allow for the possibility that many things could be true that we don't know. But this is how it looks to me. Let me finally get to the point. It's a battle between, well, no, let me say that more clearly. I'll put it like this. Master said that eventually there's going to be a real moment in time when the forces of light and the forces of darkness, I mean, when I'm talking about like in the next half a century, I'm not talking about like forever. When Master made his predictions in the 1950s, which Swami chronicled in a little book called The Road Ahead, which again can be gotten in English from Crystal Clarity. It's a very small book, and it could be translated if it hasn't been. Master spoke of world wars. He spoke of an ultimate standoff between India and America united, representing the forces of light against the forces of greed and selfishness. Don't think in terms of countries. That's not really what's happening. And he really talked about a time when there really would be sort of a clear global choice. This is when the dumbbell really becomes obvious in the world. So that's a background story. I was with Swami Kriyananda at his house at Crystal Hermitage, and this Indian teacher at that time, his name was Sant Keshavadas. He's been off the planet for many years now. He was a true Indian, true teacher, beautiful man. He came for lunch with Swamiji. I probably cooked for them because that's what I usually did, and I was there at the table. And Santji and Swamiji started talking to each other about Dwapara Yuga, about global change. These two men, their consciousness was more like each other than any of us were like them. So they were able to talk to each other in a slightly different way, which was marvelous for the rest of us who were in the room. And they were talking about the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. And what they said was, before light and darkness have a confrontation in the world around us, let me finish that thought. Master said that there would be a period of time of war and violence, but at the end of that time, these were his words, mankind will be so sick of war and violence that the planet will enter into 300 years of peace and prosperity that has never been known before. So that's where we're going. But Santji and Swami said, before light and darkness have that confrontation, darkness will fight with itself and will gradually weaken itself to the point then that where light will be able to a large extent, conquer darkness. Now, bear in mind, Dwapara is not that high in age, but it'll be better than it is now. It's not like everything's going to turn into heaven on earth, because earth is never heaven, and Dwapara is not that high in age, but nonetheless, it'll be better. So ever since I heard that, whenever I look at things like these different theories, here's this theory of the virus and that theory, and this is, when I look at it, I see darkness fighting with itself. I mean, there might be shades of gray. Some are blacker. Definitely some things are blacker than others. But I don't see, like, because light isn't just, oh, we want to be nice, we want to help people. Light is attunement with God. Light is understanding that we're part of a greater reality, that we're all brothers and sisters and children of our divine mother. That's what light is. The whole point of this difficult transition, Master said, is to awaken us to the power of self-realization, not Master's path, but the fact of self-realization. Self-realization has come to unite all religions. Jesus and Babaji are aware of the unfortunate trend of the modern world, of suicidal wars, I'm quoting almost, of race hatred, of religious bigotry, and they have planned the salvation of this age. And that salvation is the inward experience of divine light, which resolves all difficulties and unites us all. That's the solution. And when we see that, that's going to be light. And then the forces that are against that, that's the real darkness. Right now, you have one political party and another political party. You have the one that wants the government to take care of everyone and the one that wants to get the government out of our lives. You have this greedy group of self-interested people who want to set up their world order. You have this group of politicians who are trying to work with the scientists to figure out what. You know, I don't know who's right or wrong, but the way I look at it, it's not my world. And no matter what they do, until consciousness shifts, we're just going to be trading back and forth. When I first went to India in 1986 and saw overpopulation and poverty and things that I'd never seen in Europe or in America where I had been, I realized we have all the technology, we have all the wealth, we could make the world a heaven on earth, but we don't want to, because as a planet, we don't have the consciousness to do it. But who's sending the souls to this planet? It's not me, it's not you, it's not some evil cabal of, financiers some way who are drawing the right souls from the astral world. None of this has anything to do with us. In one of the last chapters of the path, Swami says, this world is not run by politicians and nations. It's run by spiritual power, great spiritual leaders. Jesus and Babaji have planned the salvation of this age. For many years, I didn't even vote because I felt like, what difference does it make? Lately, I have taken up the habit of voting because the issues are getting a little too intense. But I think I am more politically active than anyone I know, because I have devoted my whole life to changing consciousness. Because changing consciousness, meaning teaching people to meditate, talking to them about God. That's really where things are happening. So in the meantime, we're going to have to navigate ourselves. We're going to have to navigate through God knows what. Everybody's going to have to make their decisions according to what they know. But if you think for 1 minute that who gets elected president of the US is actually determining the destiny of the planet, we really need to go back to Autobiography of a Yogi and think about it over again. The way Swami puts it is the destiny of countries determines who the leaders are. The destiny of the planet determines which countries are ascendant or lack of descendant. And who's in charge of the planet? You think that these people who get elected are actually in charge of the planet? Sure, Joe, in Mumbai, one of the wonderful young men who's part of Ananda, when the pandemic hit, and in a matter of days or almost weeks, the whole planet just turned upside down. Sure, Joe, just so beautifully said, no one but Babaji could do that. He said, there's no government anywhere that has that kind of power. No one but Babaji could just take the planet and flip it on its head in a moment. So precisely who's doing it is of great interest to many people, but not particularly to me, because I don't think it really matters. Those people don't get their power from themselves. They get it from the Divine Mother. They get it from Jesus and Babaji. Whether or not you're going to take a vaccine, whether or not you're going to wear a mask, whether or not you're going to be mad at your government for keeping you in your house. Shades of gray. And if it's important to you, and it's important to some people, and I pay attention, I do pay attention, but I don't feel to participate because I'm just not, I just can't see, I can't see my reality reflected yet. That would be the best I could say about that. You know, just also one last thing. In the poem Samadhi that Master wrote, the first lines are, vanish the veils of light and shade, he says. Now, when I think about it, I always think light and darkness. I used to always think light and darkness, but he doesn't say darkness. He says light and shade. And in English, what that means, the word shade doesn't mean the light isn't there. It just means something blocks the light. And so that's the world we live in. There's light. And then there's things that block the light. But repeatedly in all the questions, the real question has always been consciousness. So before one participates in anything, you have to ask yourself, is this increasing the light within me? Or is this blocking my experience of the light? And then after that, you have to do as you feel guided. But that's always the first question. We're trying to get out of the shade and get into the light. And whatever will bring that to us, that's what we should do. We have used up all the time. I never think we're going to be able to use up all the time, but we always use up all the time. There's so much wonderful, just wonderfulness about the spiritual life. It just, we're so fortunate. Whatever difficulties we face, we're so fortunate because into our hands have been given the sacred keys of awakening. Abundant now is our hope. Even a little practice of this inward religion will free us from dire fears and colossal sufferings. What good karma we have to even know that.
Okay, jetzt hatten wir ja schon die Übersetzung abgeschaltet und müsst ihr euch das, was Asha am Schluss so schön gesagt hat, müsst ihr euch dann in der Aufzeichnung angucken. Asha, many thanks for blessing us with your presence. Thank you very much. Everybody's happy and feels blessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So nice to see you all. I hope to see you in person. I was going to be there.
Yeah, so 86 people who are joining. Wonderful. Okay, und Asha wünscht sich, dass wir uns dann irgendwann in echt sehen, wenn das wieder möglich ist. Okay, ihr Lieben, dann wir gehen jetzt gleich in die Meditation und Asha, thank you very much and have a nice, beautiful day in Palo Alto.
Bye bye, dear souls.
Bye-bye.